The Islamic terrorist organization Hamas turned to digital currencies last year to obtain tens of millions of dollars in financing from the Islamic Republic of Iran in preparation for its October 7th attack against Israel. That's according to some new reports. To chat more about this in detail is Lisa Daftari, our foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, who joins us from Los Angeles. Lisa, can you tell us how Hamas managed to use cryptocurrency to obtain funds from Iran?
Yeah, well, we've seen this before in the past. We saw it with ISIS getting donations from all over using cryptocurrency. That's before cryptocurrency was something that, everyone talked about like we have now in terms of, we talk about crypto the way we talk about stocks. So it's not surprising that this would be the roundabout way that they would get paid and not use, the traditional way of, money lines. What's more surprising about this story is how many details we have about this transaction between Hamas and its funder, Iran's regime, also its funder, Qatar. And while the West tries to separate this narrative and say, well, we don't really know if Iran's regime is involved, meanwhile, Iran's regime funding all its proxies throughout the region, pointing their guns at U.S. assets in Syria and Iraq, the United States responding to those provocations, but yet this narrative is still apart. But now there's even further detail about how they got paid, of course, how they got trained. I know the Wall Street Journal put out an expose really detailing all the meetings between Hamas and Iran's regime and other terror organizations, of course, all their proxies in the region. This was something that was well planned, well trained, and of course, well funded, and how now we know the details about that.
Wow. And over the weekend, the Israeli Defense Forces posted to their X account. They tweeted that the IAF took out a Hamas terrorist commander believed to have had 1,000 Gazans held hostage at a hospital.
Yes, and now today we know the IDF is going into these hospitals and taking the babies out of harm's way. That is not the job of your enemy, to come in and take the babies out of harm's way while you protect yourself by holding the baby up front. Meaning the world is crying out about the babies. The world is crying out about the Palestinian casualties. That number is climbing. We don't have the exact number because, again, it's coming from Hamas, right? So the Israelis go into these areas, they have to take out Hamas. That is their existential threat. Hamas does not want them to live. They do not want to live side by side. They do not want two states. They don't want any Israeli state. So when that becomes your existential threat, your enemy, which is right next door, Israel's going in with these very surgical, tactical, very pinpointed tactics to go in with trying to have the lowest casualty count possible. But when they're hiding them in schools, when they're hiding them in their bunkers, when they're hiding weapons in very, very civilian-oriented places that are quite sensitive, then that's why that number is climbing. Again, Israelis going into these different hospitals and trying to manage as best as possible, not to lose electricity, not to lose all their different resources to keep those patients alive.
Lisa, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that there could be a potential deal to free the approximately 240 people taken hostage by Hamas. Meanwhile, a Biden administration official has said that a deal is being considered to release 80 women and children in exchange for Palestinians held by Israel. So what's the latest on that?
Now, we don't know. We're hearing very conflicting reports, Naveen, and it's astute of you to put those, to juxtapose those two, because we are hearing different things. And that's really the question that many have for the Biden administration. If you are saying that you are with Israel, if you're saying that they're an ally, that they are free to do whatever they want, then stop, kind of pivoting away from that position. The Israelis, look, of course, we have to get those hostages back. Those are, it's a humanitarian effort across the world, regardless of where you are politically. And yet from the White House, we're hearing from on the Sunday news shows, you heard, I think Jake Sullivan it was, who said, we're not even sure they're alive. We don't know if we should even be hopeful about this exchange. Obviously, Hamas is holding those hostages to get their terrorists out of Israeli prisons. These are not Palestinian hostages. They're not civilians. These are terror operatives. These are Hamas operatives. And last time Israel had a very lopsided deal for one Israeli. They had thousands of Palestinian, or I should say Hamas operatives released, many of whom were involved in the planning of this attack. So it doesn't seem like I think history should not repeat itself in terms of the Israelis. I think they learned their lesson that these deals aren't really, when you're trying to get innocent civilians back, you can't have these terrorists out on the loose. Of course, it really cost Israel that massacre on October 7th. So I think that the back channels are working to get those hostages freed as soon as possible. For those who are calling for a ceasefire, I think first you have to check yourself to call for those hostages to be released first, and then we'll see a ceasefire surely soon after that.
And a U.S. senator is asking the U.S. Department of Justice to open an investigation into a number of news outlets, claiming the photographers they used were aware of the October 7th terrorist attacks on Israel prior to their execution. Who is the senator, and why does he believe the media has personnel embedded with Hamas?
Yeah, it's not just the senator. It's many who believe this was actually an expose that was broken by Honest Reporting, which is a think tank that is focused on this disproportionate and very falsified reporting coming from that part of the world. And you see there's photographs, right, of the massacre of October 7th. And you see a lot of these stringers with their cameras actually pointed at these Hamas operatives. It was almost as if they came in doing a photo shoot, right?
Wow.
So then they looked at these they're called stringers, or they're freelance journalists that are in the area. Many of them work for the big outlets, New York Times, Reuters, and CNN being a handful of those. And now that they're looking into it, these are actual employees, or they were stringers or freelancers that were in the area and they were hired by these organizations. They're saying that they may have allegedly known about it. They were called by Hamas to walk in with them in order to document the whole thing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I want to remind the audience that these are the stringers and freelance journalists that have been reporting on these stories for a long time. So think about it. That same reporter, who is allegedly now known to be a terrorist, basically, has been the one providing the narrative, providing the stories and facts for these outlets for a very long time. So it's something to really consider, and really, I hope that they go through with this investigation and get to the bottom of who these outlets are hiring.
Absolutely. Now, at Israel's northern border, the leader of Lebanon's militant group Hezbollah say they've introduced new weapons, including a missile with a heavy warhead in the ongoing fight along their shared border. Hezbollah on Friday attacked northern Israel with 3 suicide drones after an Israeli strike in central Syria killed 7 Hezbollah fighters.
Right. So, Israel inside the country is fighting 3 different fronts. In the north, it's Iran's proxy, Hezbollah. In the West Bank and Gaza, we have Hamas. And, of course, in the Palestinian authorities that really don't have even any power, or perhaps worse than that, are kind of in cahoots with Hamas. Outside of the region, we have the United States, and of course, they're also pointed towards Israel. You have the Houthis in Yemen, you have insurgencies in Syria and Iraq, and all of this, again, being supported by and controlled by Iran's regime. What we're seeing now is Lebanon basically testing the waters again and again. They have not fully engaged in a war against Israel, because it looks as though military might is working as a deterrent with this IDF inside Gaza. Does Lebanon want that? Meaning Hezbollah in Lebanon want that? They're looking and saying, well, we're not sure. We definitely don't want Hezbollah to get involved. Remember, they are a more robust and well-endowed terror organization. They're much more capable than Hamas, but at the same time, the IDF has warned them multiple times not to get involved, because they will see a similar fate as we're seeing in Gaza and the Hamas operatives there. So far, they're just testing. We're seeing a few attacks by Lebanon in the north by Hezbollah inside Lebanon, and hopefully they will be deterred from getting involved in something of a more escalation.
Now we hear about all these different terrorist organizations like the Hamas and ISIS. You touched on the Houthis. Who are they?
Yeah, so the Houthis are probably less talked about. The Houthis are another proxy group inside Yemen that are supported by Iran's regime. Up to now, the Houthis were actually fighting Saudi Arabia. So this was a proxy war between Iran's regime and Saudi Arabia. So besides for the Iran regime's support of Hamas, for example, or ISIS in cases, they are obviously a Shiite, they're the Shiite sect of Islam. They have been always fighting in the region over Sunni elements that are actually led by Saudi Arabia. So this fight has been going on since the Iran's regime came into power in 1979. They created Hezbollah, as a matter of fact, to be that deterrent in the region as a proxy. The Houthis are a continuation of that. They actually saw an opportunity, meaning the Iran regime saw an opportunity for a splinter group. They created this group called the Houthis. The Iran regime came in and started supporting them in order to be their forces there.
Now, multiple online sellers on Amazon are selling merchandise with the phrase, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which has been labeled anti-Semitic by Jewish groups and condemned by the White House. Doesn't this multinational company have policies in place that would prohibit the sale of such controversial merchandise?
You would think so. Now, imagine those kinds of statements being said about any other group or race, religion, or culture, and it would be taken off right away. I mean, cancel culture should work in both directions. I mean, it's not just the left that gets their way, but this is just horrific. I think a lot of people don't know what from the river to the sea mean, and a lot of people do know what that means. But when it is brought to Amazon's attention that from the river to the sea is not just anti-Semitic, it is an actual genocidal call for all Jews to be wiped out, for the state of Israel to be wiped out, Jews to be wiped out.
Wow.
And I'm seeing it more and more. I'm seeing it on social media posts with influencers who want to side with the Palestinians. It's fine to side with whomever you want to, even though I don't think, influencers who are talking about makeup or food or shoes should be talking about this conflict and providing such a strong opinion when they have millions of followers. It's a huge responsibility. But one in particular, I saw a female, and she does makeup, and she posted her actual picture was graffitied "From the river to the sea." It's a genocidal call. You're asking for Jews to be eliminated, and it's very irresponsible. It's very hateful, and something that should be definitely talked about, especially in the case of Amazon.
U.S. President Joe Biden will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Wednesday in San Francisco. Now, this will be the first meeting between the two leaders in nearly a year. What do you think they'll be discussing?
I mean, you would hope that they'd be discussing the current turmoil in the region. Of course, China's Xi Jinping has shown a lot of support for Iran's regime. They're working together with Russia, with Iran's regime, and that is, another force, another, puppeteer in the region. And of course, their ongoing flexing of muscles in their part of the world that has the United States very worried about their hegemonic, agenda. But you never know, because we saw Blinken meet with the Chinese a few months ago, and they basically talked about the weather, and they basically, even with the spy balloons, I think Blinken gave them a pass and said something like, "I know you guys didn't mean it, but please, it's there is no coincidences when it comes to foreign policy. It is an absolute formulaic. What we're watching is absolutely a result of weakness from the West. It's a lack of resolve from the West. I mean, even in supporting our main democratic ally in the region, Israel, there is this flip-flopping. There is one day we're very much with Israel. The other day we're going to deliver, a warning to them. We're going to tell them when to do their pauses. We're going to tell them when to do tactical pauses when they're the ones who are leading the way with their military and their tactics. So I think that it takes resolve, it takes clarity, it takes strength and leadership, and obviously we're missing that all right now.
She is our foreign affairs expert and the host of The Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, thank you for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.